Wyoming Territory, 1879. A woman steps down from a weathered stagecoach into the harsh afternoon light, her gloved hand clutching a letter bearing unfamiliar handwriting. Her eyes scan the dusty main street, searching for the face that matches. The daguerreotype in her pocket, a face she's traveled 1,800 miles to meet. But only strangers stare back. And as the coach rumbles away, leaving her alone with her trunks, she realizes destiny has taken an unexpected turn. What awaits her will test not only her resilience, but reveal that sometimes our true strength emerges only when everything we planned has vanished like morning mist. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late April wind whipped mercilessly across Redemption Valley as the twice-weekly stagecoach from Cheyenne lurched to a stop outside the Frontier Inn. Dust swirled around the wheels, momentarily obscuring the weather-beaten sign that proclaimed the town's population of 243 souls, though that count seemed generous to anyone who had walked its single rutted street. Catherine Blackwell pressed a handkerchief to her lips, filtering the grit that seemed determined to coat her throat. 25 years old, with auburn hair and eyes the color of summer sage, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that masked her inner turmoil. The journey from Boston had taken 14 days of constant motion, each mile carrying her farther from the life she'd known and closer to an uncertain future with a man she'd never met. Redemption Valley, announced the driver, a weathered man called Briggs, who had maintained stony silence for most of the final day's journey. End of the line for you, miss. He tipped his hat before turning to unload the luggage. Catherine smoothed the wrinkles from her traveling dress, a practical grey wool that had once been stylish in Boston, but now seemed as out of place as she felt. Inside her leather satchel lay her most precious possessions, letters from Samuel Reed, the deed to her family's Massachusetts property, $200 in carefully hidden banknotes, and a small silver locket containing a miniature portrait of her late mother. Mr. Samuel Reed, she asked the driver, scanning the small crowd that had gathered to witness the stagecoach's arrival. I'm to meet him today. Briggs spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. Don't know no Reed. Check with Sheriff Donovan, or maybe Mrs. Henderson at the Mercantile. They know most everyone around these parts. A flicker of unease passed through Catherine, but she quickly suppressed it. After 15 months of correspondence, she had traveled across the country to meet Samuel Reed, whose letters had painted a picture of a modest but promising cattle ranch 10 miles outside of Redemption Valley. His last letter had explicitly stated he would meet her stagecoach on this day. Her trunk and 2 valises were unloaded from the roof of the coach. Within moments, the stagecoach was disappearing down the street, leaving Catherine standing alone with her possessions. Need some help, ma'am? A boy of perhaps 11 approached, eyeing her luggage with entrepreneurial interest. Yes, thank you. Is there somewhere I might wait while my trunk is delivered to the Reed Ranch? She reached into her purse and extracted a nickel that brought a gap-toothed smile to the boy's face. Reed Ranch? The boy's brow furrowed. Don't know any Reed Ranch. Unease blossomed into concern. Mr. Samuel Reed. He raises cattle about 10 miles north of town, according to his letters. The boy shook his head. Only cattle operation north. Of here belongs to old Harmon, and he died last winter. Place is sitting empty, as far as I know. Catherine felt the ground shift beneath her feet. There must be some mistake. I've been corresponding with Mr. Reed for over a year. He described his property in great detail. You could ask Sheriff Donovan, the boy suggested, already lifting one of her valises. He knows everybody for 30 miles around. The sheriff's office was a square wooden building with a freshly painted sign and windows clean enough to suggest its occupant valued order. Inside, Sheriff Michael Donovan looked up from his desk, setting aside a stack of wanted posters as Catherine entered. "Something I can help you with, ma'am?" he asked, rising to his feet. "I hope so, Sheriff. I'm looking for Samuel Reed. I was to meet him today upon my arrival." The sheriff's expression shifted subtly. "And you are?" "Catherine Blackwell. Mr. Reed and I have been corresponding for 15 months. I've come from Boston to—" She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "To be his wife." Donovan removed his hat, a gesture that immediately confirmed her growing fears. "Miss Blackwell, I'm afraid there's no Samuel Reed in Redemption Valley or the surrounding county. Not now, and not in the 3 years I've served as sheriff." The words struck Catherine with physical force. "That's impossible. I have his letters." She opened her satchel with trembling fingers, withdrawing a packet of 23 letters, each bearing the same bold handwriting: Samuel Reed, North Star Ranch, Redemption Valley, Wyoming Territory. Donovan examined the letters, his frown deepening. "The handwriting is educated, I'll give you that, but I'm sorry to say you've been deceived, ma'am." "But why would anyone—" Catherine couldn't complete the question. The sheriff sighed. "It happens more than folks talk about. Some men write to Eastern women, spinning tales about prosperous ranches and comfortable lives. They take whatever money the women send for travel expenses, maybe keep up the correspondence long enough to request more funds for wedding preparations, then disappear." Catherine sank into a chair, her mind racing. She had been careful. So careful, she had insisted on corresponding for a full year before agreeing to travel west. Reed's letters had been consistent, detailed, and seemingly sincere. He had never directly asked for money, though she had sent funds to purchase wedding rings and furnishings for their home 3 months ago. "Was there a Harmon ranch that's now empty?" she asked finally. "Yes, ma'am. Jeremiah Harmon's place about 10 miles north. He passed in January. Pneumonia took him. Place has been sitting vacant. His nephew's coming from Ohio to claim it, but not till summer's end from what I hear." "I see." Catherine's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Miss Blackwell, the Frontier Inn has clean rooms at reasonable rates. I'd suggest you take a day or two to consider your options before the next eastbound stage on Thursday." The implication was clear. Return to Boston, admit defeat, accept that she had been duped by a confidence man who had preyed on her vulnerability. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll consider it." Her voice was steady, belying the turmoil within. Outside, the afternoon sun had begun its descent, painting Redemption Valley in golden hues that couldn't disguise its roughness. The town consisted of a general store, the inn, 2 saloons, a blacksmith shop, a small church, and a scattering of houses and businesses. Nothing like Boston with its cobblestone streets and gaslit avenues. Catherine made her way to the Frontier Inn, arranging for a room and the storage of her trunk. $2 secured her a small but clean chamber with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the town's main street. Once alone, she finally allowed herself to absorb the magnitude of her situation. Samuel Reed didn't exist. The ranch he had described in such loving detail was fictional. The 15 months of correspondence, the plans, the hopes, all built on falsehood. Half of her savings was spent on the journey west, and now she was stranded in a frontier town where she knew no one. She unfolded Reed's last letter, reading it again by the fading light. "My dearest Catherine, as I write this, spring has finally come to North Star Ranch. The meadows are greening, and the calves born last month have begun to find their legs. I've completed the improvements to the main house, including the bookshelf-lined study I promised you. The bedroom faces east, as you requested, to catch the morning light you so cherish. I count the days until April 18th, when I will finally meet you at the stagecoach. Look for a man in a black hat with a silver band. I'll be the one with the most genuine smile, as I'll finally be welcoming home the woman whose letters have brought such joy to my solitary life. Until then, I remain faithfully yours, Samuel." The details were so specific, so seemingly heartfelt. How could someone fabricate such sincerity? And more practically, what was she to do now? Returning to Boston was the obvious answer, but the thought filled her with dread. She had sold her family home, settled her father's affairs after his unexpected death, and departed with no intention of returning. Boston held nothing but painful memories of her father's murder and the relentless pursuit by Frederick Lawrence, the business partner whose embezzlement her father had discovered just before his death. What Frederick didn't know, what no one knew, was that Thomas Blackwell had secretly transferred the ownership documents of his prosperous shipping business to his daughter before confronting Lawrence. The business that Frederick assumed would come to him through legal maneuvering or intimidation was legally Catherine's, along with the substantial funds her father had withdrawn from the bank in his final days. "I won't have him forcing your hand through threats or violence," her father had written in his final note to her. "This gives you freedom to escape." Catherine had chosen freedom in the West, a fresh start with a man who seemed to value her mind as well as her potential as a wife. Now that dream had evaporated like morning mist. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was the innkeeper's. A wife, a sturdy woman with intelligent eyes who introduced herself as Martha Cooper. "Thought you might like some supper, Miss Blackwell. We serve meals downstairs, but I figured you might prefer privacy after your long journey." "That's very thoughtful. Thank you." Catherine accepted the tray of simple but appetizing food: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and a slice of apple pie. Martha lingered in the doorway. "Sheriff Donovan mentioned your situation. I'm real sorry about that. Some men ain't got the decency God gave a rattlesnake." "It seems not." Catherine managed a small smile. "If you're thinking of heading back east, stage fare's $18. To Cheyenne, then there's the train from there, $18, a substantial sum, though well within her means. But returning meant facing Frederick Lawrence, meant admitting defeat, meant surrendering the independence she had fought so hard to secure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "And if I weren't heading east?" Catherine asked carefully. Martha considered this. "Well, Redemption Valley's growing. We get the cattle drives from the south, miners passing through to the mountains. Town needs all sorts of services. Seamstress, maybe, or a teacher if you've got learning." "I have some experience with bookkeeping," Catherine offered. Her father had insisted she understand every aspect of his business, unusual as that was for a woman. "That's something. Might talk to Benjamin, Taylor at the bank. He's been looking for help since his clerk moved on to Denver." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for the suggestion." "Sleep on it," Martha advised with a kind smile. "Things often look different in the morning light." After Martha left, Catherine ate mechanically, her mind racing with possibilities. She had planned to keep her wealth secret in any case, to ensure Samuel Reed wanted her for herself, not her inheritance. Now that deception seemed prescient rather than unnecessary. If she stayed, she could build something for herself. If she claimed her full inheritance openly, she could potentially purchase property, establish a business. But would a woman alone be accepted as a business owner in the Wyoming Territory? And how long before word reached Boston and Frederick Lawrence came looking for what he believed was rightfully his? Catherine stepped to the window, gazing out at Redemption Valley as darkness fell. Lanterns were being lit along the main street, casting pools of golden light. The town was smaller than she had imagined, rougher, but there was something appealing in its straightforward nature. No pretense, no society rules to navigate. A decision began to form. She would visit the Harmon Ranch tomorrow. She would see for herself the land that Samuel Reed had described as if it were his own. Perhaps there, among the emptiness of one false future, she might find the seeds of a real one. But before Catherine could implement her plan, destiny would take yet another unexpected turn. while she watched the lamplights of Redemption Valley. Glowing against the darkening sky, a lone rider was approaching town from the north. A man whose connection to the empty Harmon Ranch and to Catherine herself would challenge everything she thought she knew about her journey west. A man whose scarred face concealed secrets as profound as her own. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. After a breakfast of biscuits and coffee in the Frontier Inn's dining room, Catherine arranged to hire a horse and wagon to take her to the Harmon property. The livery stable owner, a taciturn man named Ellis Jenkins, agreed to drive her himself for $1.50. "Not much to see out there," he warned as they set off. "Just an empty house and some outbuildings. Cattle's been moved to the Morgan. Spread until the nephew arrives. Nevertheless, I'd like to see it," Catherine replied firmly. If nothing else, she needed to understand what had drawn her across the country on the basis of a fiction. The journey took almost an hour, following a rutted track that wound through sagebrush plains and rolling hills dotted with spring wildflowers. Despite her circumstances, Catherine found herself captivated by the landscape's untamed beauty, so different from Boston's crowded streets. They crested a small rise, and Jenkins pointed ahead. "There's the Harmon place." A cluster of buildings came into view in a small valley beside a winding creek lined with cottonwood trees. Unlike what she'd imagined from Samuel Reed's letters, the main house was modest. A simple one-story structure, built of rough-hewn logs with a pitched roof and stone chimney. A barn stood nearby, its doors hanging open. A smaller cabin, perhaps for hired hands, stood a short distance away, and corrals stretched behind the barn. "You can let me out here," Catherine said as they approached. "Would it be possible for you to return in 2 hours?" Jenkins looked doubtful. "Not much to look at for 2 hours, miss, and it ain't exactly safe for a lady alone. Wolves have been sighted recently, and sometimes drifters take shelter in empty places. I'll be careful," she assured him. "I just need some time to—" She trailed off, unsure how to explain her need to connect with this place that had featured so prominently in Reed's fabricated life. Jenkins shrugged. "You're 50. I'll be back at noon, but I'd stay near the main house if I were you." Once alone, Catherine approached the ranch house cautiously. The door was unlocked. Common enough in these parts, she supposed. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished but clean. Whoever had closed it up after Jeremiah Harmon's death had done so with care. The main room combined a kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a cast-iron cookstove at the other. A wooden table with 4 chairs stood in the center. 2 doors led off the main room, one to a small bedroom with a rope bed frame stripped of its mattress, the other to what appeared to be a rudimentary office with a desk and empty bookshelf. Nothing like the grand ranch house Samuel Reed had described, with its bookshelf-lined study and bedroom that faces east to catch the morning light. Yet standing in this simple frontier home, Catherine felt a strange connection to the place. In her mind, she had already lived here, had imagined arranging books on shelves and waking to sunrise through eastern windows. She ran her fingers along the rough-hewn mantel. The house was humble but solid, built to withstand Wyoming winters and summer heat alike. With proper furnishings and a woman's touch, it could become a true home. Outside again, Catherine explored the remaining structures. The barn was larger than the house, with stalls for at least 8 horses and a hayloft above. The smaller cabin was a single room with a stone fireplace and plank floors. It had obviously been uninhabited for some time. Dust covered every surface, and a family of mice had nested in a corner. As Catherine completed her circuit of the property, a sense of possibility began to grow. The land itself was beautiful. A creek provided water year-round according to Reed's letters, perhaps the only truthful information he'd provided. Meadows offered grazing, and the distant hills promised shelter from winter winds. Sitting on The porch steps of the main house, Catherine made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She would not return to Boston. She would not admit defeat. Instead, she would use a portion of her inheritance to purchase this property, if possible, and build something for herself. The practical challenges were enormous. A woman alone in the Wyoming Territory, attempting to establish a ranch. It was unconventional at best, dangerously foolhardy at worst. But the alternative, returning east to face Frederick Lawrence's threats and machinations, was unthinkable. A sound from the direction of the creek interrupted her thoughts. Hoofbeats, steady and approaching. Catherine stood quickly, suddenly, aware of her vulnerability. She was alone, 10 miles from town, with only a small Derringer pistol in her satchel for protection. A rider emerged from the cottonwoods along the creek. Even at a distance, Catherine could tell this was no ordinary ranch hand or drifter. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders draped in a long duster despite the spring warmth. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, and a rifle was slung across his saddle. The stranger rode directly to the main house, stopping 30 feet from where Catherine stood. For a long moment, he simply studied her from beneath the brim of his hat. Then he dismounted with fluid grace that belied his size. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat with a gloved hand. His voice was deep, with a gravelly quality that suggested it wasn't often used. "You're trespassing." Catherine straightened her spine, fear giving way to indignation. "I beg your pardon?" "This is private property," the man stated flatly. As he stepped forward, sunlight fell across his face, revealing a jagged scar that ran from his right temple down across his cheek to the corner of his mouth, pulling it into a permanent half-grimace. His eyes, a startling ice blue, studied her with a cold assessment. "I was informed Mr. Harmon is deceased and the property is unoccupied," Catherine replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "That's correct." The man's expression didn't change. "And I'm the caretaker until the estate is settled. Nathan Hawke, U.S. Marshal." The revelation that this intimidating stranger was a lawman should have been reassuring, but something in his manner, a coiled tension, a vigilant watchfulness, kept Catherine on guard. "Catherine Blackwell," she offered. "I arrived yesterday from Boston, expecting to meet someone who had described this property to me, only to discover that person doesn't exist and the property was never theirs to offer." Hawke's weathered face showed a flicker of understanding. "Mail order arrangement?" Heat rose in Catherine's cheeks, but she nodded. "Yes. Happens more than folks admit," he said, his tone neutral. He glanced toward the house. "But this place isn't for sale, if that's what you're thinking. Nephew's coming from Ohio, already sent word he intends to claim his inheritance." "I see." Disappointment settled heavily on Catherine's shoulders. Her nascent plan seemed to be crumbling before it had fully formed. "When is he expected to arrive?" "August, maybe September." Hawke shrugged slightly. "Meanwhile, I keep an eye on things, make sure nobody walks off with Harmon's property." Catherine glanced around the ranch again, noting details she had missed in her initial exploration. Despite months of abandonment, there was a certain cared-for quality to the outbuildings. Someone, Hawke presumably, had been maintaining what remained. "Were you friends with Mr. Harmon?" she asked. "Neighbors," he replied shortly. "My cabin's 5 miles west. When he fell ill, I promised I'd look after the place until his nephew arrived." A new possibility occurred to Catherine. "Marshal Hawke, would it be possible for me to rent the smaller cabin until the nephew arrives? I find myself in need of accommodations, and returning east isn't an option I wish to pursue." Hawke's expression remained impassive, but she saw assessment in his eyes. "Lady like you alone out here? 10 miles? From town? Not advisable." "I appreciate your concern, but I'm more capable than I appear." Catherine met his gaze steadily. "I'm willing to pay a fair rent, and I could help maintain the property while you attend to your other duties." "And what happens when the nephew arrives and wants you gone?" "By then, I'll have had time to consider other options," she replied. "Or to make the nephew an offer he couldn't refuse," though she kept that thought to herself. Hawk studied her for a long moment. "Cabin needs work. Roof leaks in 2 places. Chimney needs cleaning." "I'm not afraid of work, Marshal." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. $5 a month includes use of the well and whatever's growing in the kitchen garden. Tools in the barn are off limits without permission." "That seems fair," Catherine said, though in truth, it was more than fair, it was generous. "I check the property every few days," Hawk continued. "Won't enter the cabin without invitation, but I'll expect to see progress on those repairs." Catherine extended her hand. "We have an agreement, Marshal Hawk." After a moment's hesitation, he shook it, his large hand engulfing her smaller one. His palm was calloused, his grip firm but careful. "Miss Blackwell," he released her hand and gestured toward his horse. "I can take you back to town to collect your belongings." As they rode double on Hawk's stallion, Catherine perched uncomfortably in front of the marshal, acutely aware of his solid presence at her back. Her mind raced with plans and possibilities. By the time they reached town, she had formulated a clear strategy for establishing herself at the Harmon property. First, she would need supplies, tools for repairs, household essentials, food staples. Then she would need to send carefully worded letters to her father's solicitor in Boston, arranging for additional funds without revealing her exact location. The town appeared different to Catherine, now that she had a purpose beyond meeting a fictional fiancé. She noticed details she had missed in her initial shock and disappointment. The quality of goods in the mercantile windows, the types of people on the street, the opportunities that might exist in this growing frontier community. "The general store carries most basics," Hawk said as they dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. "Sarah Henderson runs it since her husband passed. She can order anything she doesn't stock." "Thank you for the information," Catherine replied, "and for the arrangement regarding the cabin." Hawk merely nodded, then hesitated as if weighing whether to say more. Finally, he reached into his duster and withdrew a small leather pouch. "Harmon's vegetable seeds," he explained, "saved from last year's garden. No sense letting them go to waste." The unexpected gesture touched Catherine. "That's very kind." Not kindness, practicality. His scarred face revealed nothing. "Got my own ranch to manage. Don't have time to tend 2 gardens." Before she could respond, Sheriff Donovan emerged from his office, surprise evident on his face as he took in the unlikely pair. "Nate," he greeted the marshal with a nod. "Didn't expect to see you in town this week." "Found Miss Blackwell at the Harmon place," Hawk replied. "She'll be renting the line cabin for a spell." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That's so. Thought you were considering options about heading back east, Miss Blackwell." "I've decided to remain in Wyoming territory, at least until other arrangements can be made," Catherine said firmly. Donovan and Hawk exchanged a look that Catherine couldn't quite interpret. Concern, perhaps, or resignation. "Marshal Hawk has kindly offered to let me stay in the smaller cabin at the Harmon Ranch," she continued. "It seems a practical solution for all involved." "Practical isn't the word most would choose," Donovan said dryly. "But it's your decision, ma'am. Just know that out there you're beyond easy reach if trouble comes calling." "I'm aware of the risks, Sheriff," Catherine replied, "and I believe the benefits outweigh them." "Your funeral," Donovan muttered, then caught himself. "Figure of speech. Ma'am, no offense intended, none taken." Catherine turned to Hawk. "I'll need a few hours to gather supplies and make arrangements at the bank. Would late afternoon be convenient to return to the ranch?" The marshal nodded once. "I'll be back at 4. Meet me here." As Hawk strode away toward the livery stable, Donovan watched him go with a thoughtful expression. known Nate Hawk for 5 years, he said conversationally. Man of few words and fewer smiles, but as solid as they come. Surprised he's letting you stay out there, though. Why is that? Catherine asked. Since that Comanche raid left him with that scar, he's kept, mostly to himself. Does his job as marshal when needed, but otherwise sticks to his ranch and stays clear of people. Donovan studied her curiously. Must see something in you he trusts. The observation gave Catherine pause. What had made the forbidding marshal agree to her impulsive proposal? Was it merely convenience, or something more complex? No matter. She had secured temporary shelter and bought herself time to formulate a longer-term plan. That was enough for now. The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Catherine withdrew a modest sum from her hidden funds and opened an account at the Redemption Valley Bank, introducing herself as a widow with a small inheritance, a sardage fiction that would explain her independence without raising too many questions. She purchased essential supplies at Henderson's Mercantile, where Sarah Henderson proved to be a fountain of local information. "Marshal Hawk's letting you stay at the Line cabin?" the shopkeeper asked as she packed Catherine's purchases. "That's mighty unexpected. Man's been a ghost since he came back from that bounty hunt 3 years ago. Before that raid, he was different, smiled, sometimes even played fiddle at town socials." "The sheriff mentioned a Comanche raid," Catherine said carefully. Sarah nodded solemnly. "Terrible business. Hawk was tracking some outlaws down near the Texas border when his posse was ambushed. Only one who survived, but those savages left their mark on him, inside and out." She tapped her own cheek. "That scar's just what shows on the surface." Catherine absorbed this information thoughtfully. The marshal's reserved demeanor and watchful. He's made more sense now. He was a man who had learned the hard way that danger could strike without warning. "The Harmon place is good land," Sarah continued, changing the subject. "Jeremiah was a fine rancher, though he never quite got over losing his wife in childbirth. Kept to himself these last 10 years, much like Hawk does." "Do you know anything about the nephew who's coming to claim the property?" Catherine asked. Sarah shrugged. "Never met him. Jeremiah mentioned him once or twice. Son of his late brother, raised back east somewhere. Ohio, I think. Name's William Harmon. Lawyer by trade, from what I heard." A lawyer from Ohio. Catherine filed this information away. If William Harmon was indeed coming to claim his inheritance, she would need to decide whether to approach him about purchasing the property outright or seeking some other arrangement. At 4 o'clock precisely, Catherine stood outside the sheriff's office with her trunk and supplies loaded on a small wagon she'd rented from the livery. Marshal Hawk arrived minutes later, leading a packhorse alongside his own mount. "Ready?" he asked simply. Catherine nodded, gathering the wagon's reins. "Yes." As they left Redemption Valley behind, Catherine felt a curious mixture of trepidation and anticipation. She was venturing into the unknown, a woman alone in the wilderness, save for the occasional presence of a scarred, taciturn lawman who clearly preferred solitude to company. Yet for the first time since discovering Samuel Reed's deception, she felt something like hope. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges she couldn't yet fully comprehend. But it was her path, chosen freely, leading away from Boston's dangers toward a future limited only by her own courage and determination. The ground beneath her feet was shifting once again, but this time Catherine Blackwell was prepared to stand, firm. What she couldn't know was that Marshal Nathan Hawk harbored secrets of his own, secrets that would soon intertwine with hers in ways neither could imagine. And as they rode in silence toward the Harmon Ranch, miles away in Boston, Frederick Lawrence was examining a telegraph message from his informant in Cheyenne. A message that would set him on Catherine's trail with vengeance in his heart and blood on his hands. 1 week after moving into the line cabin at the former Harmon Ranch, Catherine Blackwell awoke to water dripping steadily onto her forehead. The promised roof leaks had made themselves known during the night's unexpected rainstorm, and now her bedding was soaked through. "Wonderful," she muttered, climbing from the narrow cot and positioning her washbasin to catch the worst of the drips. The cabin, which had seemed full of rustic potential by daylight, revealed its true character in the rain: dark, damp, and decidedly unwelcoming. The fireplace had indeed smoked terribly when she'd attempted to cook the previous evening, forcing her to make do with cold biscuits and jerky purchased from Henderson's store. Catherine changed into her work dress, a practical brown cotton garment, and stepped outside to assess the damage. The rain had slackened to a gentle patter. The cabin roof's wooden shingles had rotted in several places, creating the leaks that had disturbed her sleep. Repairing it would require materials she didn't have and skills she hadn't yet acquired. A sound from the direction of the barn caught her attention. Someone was moving around inside. Hawk, most likely, checking on the property as promised. Catherine hesitated, reluctant to appear helpless, but practicality won out. She needed advice, if not assistance. Nathan Hawk was examining the barn's door hinges when she entered, his back to her as he worked a drop of oil into the rusted metal. Despite the early hour, he was fully dressed in dark trousers, a faded blue shirt, and his ever-present gun belt. His duster and hat hung on a peg nearby. "Marshal Hawk," she called, not wanting to startle him. He turned, meeting her gaze with those ice-blue eyes. Without his hat shadowing his features, the jagged scar on his right cheek was more prominent, a white line against his sun-darkened skin. "Miss Blackwell," his gaze took in her damp hair and mud-spattered dress. "Roof leaks?" "Yes," Catherine admitted, "worse than I expected. Told you the cabin needed work. So you did. I need to purchase repair materials. Could you recommend where? I might acquire shingles and whatever else is necessary." Hawk slipped the small oil can into his pocket. "Wilson's lumber mill 5 miles east, but those roof repairs will require more than materials." "I'm a quick learner," Catherine said defensively. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "No doubt. But some tasks need strength as well as knowledge." She lifted her chin. "Then perhaps we could arrange an exchange. I notice the garden's been neglected. I could restore it in exchange for your assistance with the roof." Hawk's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in his stance. "Not much of a gardener myself, and I'm not much of a carpenter. It seems we each have something to offer." He considered this, then nodded once. "I'll bring shingles tomorrow. Need to measure the damage first." He gestured toward the barn's roof. "This needs attention too before the hay storage is compromised." "I appreciate the help," Catherine said. She hesitated, then added, "Would you like coffee? I managed that much before the fireplace smoked me out." "Chimney needs cleaning, probably blocked by a bird's nest." He glanced toward the cabin. "I can look at that too." She hadn't expected such ready assistance. "Thank you, but I don't want to impose on your time." "Not an imposition. Looking after the property is my responsibility. That includes making sure you don't freeze or drown before winter." His tone was matter-of-fact, but Catherine detected something else beneath it, a gruff kindness he seemed determined to disguise as mere obligation. The next morning brought Nathan Hawk and his wagon loaded with cedar shingles, roofing tools, and a collection of items Catherine hadn't thought to request: chimney brushes, a small step-ladder, a coil of wire, and several glass panes to replace the cracked window in the cabin's rear wall. "You've been busy," she observed as he unloaded the supplies. "Figured we'd handle all the urgent repairs at once." Hawk set down a crate of nails, the muscles in his forearms bunching visibly beneath his rolled-up sleeves. "Weather holds we can finish before sunset." Despite his taciturn manner, Catherine found herself warming to Hawk's directness. There was no condescension in his offer of help, just practical assessment of what needed doing. "I'll pay for the materials," she said, reaching for her reticule. He shook his head. "Property account. Harmon left funds for maintenance. Then I insist on providing lunch at least, and I'll start in the garden this afternoon." The day unfolded in a rhythm of shared labor. Hawk tackled the cabin roof first, working with the efficiency of a man accustomed to handling tasks alone. Catherine served as his assistant, handing up nails and shingles when needed, steadying the ladder and learning the basics of roof repair through careful observation. By midday, the worst leaks were patched, and they paused for a simple meal of bread, cheese and apples that Catherine had prepared. "You mentioned you're a marshal," she said, as they sat on the cabin's small porch. "Is that what brings you to this region?" Hawk nodded, chewing methodically. "Territory needs law, not enough of it to go around. And your ranch, is it nearby?" 5 miles west, like I said." He gestured vaguely in that direction. "Small spread, enough for one man." Catherine sensed his reluctance to discuss his personal affairs, but curiosity pushed her forward. "The sheriff mentioned you were injured in a Comanche raid." Hawk's expression closed immediately. "Donovan talks too much." "I apologize for prying," Catherine said quickly. "It wasn't my intention to—" "3 years ago," he interrupted, his voice flat. "Tracking the Slater gang near the Texas border. They'd robbed a bank in Cheyenne, killed 2 people. Trail led us into Comanche territory." He touched the scar on his face briefly, an unconscious gesture. "Ambush at dawn. 5 men died. I lived. End of story." The stark account, delivered without emotion, told Catherine more about the man than a detailed narrative might have. Whatever horrors he had witnessed that day had been locked away, compartmentalized but not forgotten. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said simply. Hawk studied her for a moment, then gave a single nod before standing. "Chimney next, then the window." As the afternoon wore on, Catherine found herself increasingly impressed by Hawk's capabilities. He approached each task methodically, wasting no motion, finding creative solutions to problems as they arose. His scarred face rarely revealed emotion, but occasionally she caught a glimpse of satisfaction when a repair was completed to his standards. For her part, Catherine threw herself into clearing the overgrown garden with determination. Years of privileged Boston living hadn't prepared her for such physical labor, but she attacked the weeds and tangled vegetation with vigor, uncovering rows that had once been carefully tended. By sunset, the critical repairs were complete. The roof, longer leaked, the chimney drew properly, and the cracked window had been replaced. Catherine's muscles ached from unaccustomed labor, but satisfaction outweighed discomfort. "Thank you," she said, as Hawk loaded his tools back into his wagon. "The cabin is much more livable now." "Garden tomorrow?" he asked, glancing at her progress. "With the cleared beds. Yes, I noticed some vegetables struggling beneath the weeds. With proper care they might recover." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. Harmon's wife had a way with growing things. Place hasn't been the same since she passed. It was the most personal observation he had offered all day, a glimpse of the man beneath the taciturn exterior. "I'll do my best to honor her work," Catherine said. Hawk nodded, then hesitated before reaching into his wagon and retrieving a burlap sack. "Tools," he explained, handing it to her. "Garden tools. Found them in the main house. Might be useful." The unexpected gesture touched Catherine. "That's very kind, not kindness, practicality." It seemed to be his refrain whenever she noted an act of generosity. As his wagon disappeared down the track, Catherine surveyed the cabin and surrounding property with new eyes. What had seemed overwhelming that morning now felt manageable, a challenge she could meet with the right knowledge and assistance. The next morning, Catherine awoke to the sound of distant gunfire. She rushed outside, heart pounding, to see a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. 3 riders moving fast. Catherine grabbed her derringer from the bedside table and positioned herself on the porch, the small pistol concealed in the folds of her skirt. As the riders drew nearer, she recognized the center figure, Sheriff Donovan, flanked by two men she hadn't seen before. "Miss Blackwell," Donovan called as they reined in before the cabin. "Need to speak with you urgently. Is Marshal Hawk here?" "No, he left yesterday evening. What happened?" Donovan dismounted, his expression grave. "Stagecoach was robbed this morning, 5 miles south of town. Driver killed, passengers robbed." He glanced at his companions. "These gentlemen are Pinkerton agents, tracking the gang responsible. Robbery matches their pattern." The two men remained, mounted, studying Catherine with open curiosity. Both wore city clothes despite the dust of travel, and their eyes held the cold calculation of men accustomed to hunting human prey. "What does this have to do with me?" Catherine asked, keeping her voice steady, despite a sudden chill of apprehension. "Need to find Hawk," Donovan said. "He knows this territory better than anyone. Pinkertons need a tracker if we're going to catch this gang before they hit another stage." "As I said, he's not here. I expect he's at his own ranch." The older of the two Pinkerton men, grey-haired with sharp eyes, leaned forward in his saddle. "You're the mail-order bride, aren't you? The one who came looking for a man who doesn't exist?" Catherine's grip tightened on her concealed derringer. "I fail to see how that's relevant to your manhunt, sir." "Just establishing facts, ma'am," the man replied with a thin smile. "Name's Davis. This is my colleague, Mr. Morgan. We've been chasing the Slater gang for 2 years now." "Slater gang?" Catherine echoed, remembering Hawk's brief mention of them the day before. "Nasty bunch," Davis confirmed. "Led by James Slater and his brother Frank. They've robbed banks and stages from Colorado to Montana. Thought Marshal Hawk might have a personal interest in helping us catch them, considering what happened last time he tangled with them." Before Catherine could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Nathan Hawk rode into view, rifle across his saddle, his expression darkening as he took in the gathering before Catherine's cabin. "Donovan," he acknowledged the sheriff curtly, then eyed the Pinkerton agents with open suspicion. "What brings the law to Harmon's place in such a hurry?" "Slaters are back," Donovan said without preamble. "Hit the southbound stage this morning. Tom Riley's dead." A muscle twitched in Hawk's scarred cheek. "Riley was a good man. Family? Wife and 2 kids in Cheyenne," Donovan confirmed grimly. Hawk's gaze shifted to the Pinkerton agents. "And you two?" Davis straightened in his saddle. "John Davis, Pinkerton Detective Agency. We've been tracking the Slaters since Denver. Lost. Their trail north of Cheyenne. Picked it up again after today's robbery." "Why here?" Hawk demanded, his eyes narrow. "Why bring this to Miss Blackwell's door?" "Looking for you," Donovan explained. "These men need a tracker, someone who knows the territory. Thought you'd want to be involved, considering I'm the only survivor of the last posse that went after them." Hawk finished flatly. He dismounted, handing his reins to Catherine in a gesture that seemed oddly intimate. "Step inside, Miss Blackwell. This doesn't concern you." "Actually," Davis interjected smoothly, "it might. The Slaters have a new pattern. They've been targeting stagecoaches carrying mail, specifically postal orders and bank drafts. Our sources suggest they're looking for something specific." His gaze fixed on Catherine, or someone. Hawk moved subtly, positioning himself between Catherine and the Pinkerton agent. "Explain." "The gang's been making inquiries about a woman traveling west from Boston." Morgan spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly gentle compared to his hard eyes. "A woman with access to substantial funds. They hit 3 stages along routes. She might have taken." Cold dread settled in Catherine's stomach. Could Frederick Lawrence have hired outlaws to find her? How far would he go to secure her father's business? Why would outlaws target one woman? Hawk asked. But Catherine could. Tell from his tone that he'd already made the connection. "Because someone's paying them well to find her," Davis said. Someone back east with deep pockets and a burning interest in her whereabouts. Catherine's mind raced. If Lawrence had indeed set the Slater gang on her trail, nowhere in Wyoming territory would be safe. Certainly not an isolated cabin 10 miles. "And from town. If the lady's in danger," Hawk said slowly, "then the safest place for her is under direct protection of the law." He turned to Catherine, his expression unreadable. "Miss Blackwell, circumstances require a change in our arrangements." "What do you mean?" she asked, though she suspected what was coming. "By the authority vested in me as a United States Marshal," Hawk said formally, "I'm placing you under my protection until this threat is resolved." He glanced at the others. "Officially?" Davis raised an eyebrow. "And unofficially?" Hawk's scarred face hardened. "Unofficially, as of this moment, Miss Catherine Blackwell is my wife." The declaration hung in the air like a gunshot. Catherine stared at him in shock, while Donovan's mouth fell open. "Your wife?" the sheriff sputtered. "Makes the most sense," Hawk said coolly. "A woman living alone is a target. A marshal's wife is protected by law. Anyone comes looking for Catherine Blackwell, they'll find Catherine Hawk, legally wed. And beyond their reach." Catherine found her voice at last. "Don't I have some say in this arrangement?" Hawk met her gaze directly. "You want to survive what's coming? This is your best chance. We can stage a proper ceremony in town for appearances, but from this moment to anyone who asks, we've been married since you arrived last week." "A convenient fiction," Davis observed dryly. "A necessary one," Hawk corrected. He turned back to Catherine, his voice softening slightly. "I'm not asking for anything but the right to keep you alive, Miss Blackwell. You'll have my name, my protection, and my word that it goes no further than that." Catherine weighed her options quickly. If Lawrence had indeed set killers on her trail, Hawk's protection was her best hope of survival. The marshal had proven himself honorable in their brief acquaintance, and his proposal, while unorthodox, was clearly motivated by professional duty rather than personal interest. "Very well," she said finally, "but I have conditions of my own." Something like respect flickered in Hawk's eyes. "Name them." "This arrangement ends when the danger has passed. I retain control of my personal finances and freedom to establish my own business ventures here, and I want the truth about what happened between you and the Slater gang 3 years ago." Hawk's expression hardened momentarily. Then he gave a curt nod. "Agreed to the first 2. The third, when the time is right." "Now, Marshal," Catherine insisted, "if I'm to be your wife, even in name only, I need to understand what we're facing." A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft snort of horses and the distant call of a meadowlark. Finally, Hawk turned to Donovan and the Pinkerton agents. "Give us some privacy. I'll meet you in town in 2 hours to organize the search." After the men had ridden away, Hawk stood silently on the porch, staring out at the distant hills. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and stripped of emotion. 3 years ago, I led a posse of 6 men after the Slater gang. They'd robbed the bank in Cheyenne, killed a teller and a customer. We tracked them south into Colorado, then east toward the Texas border." He paused, his hand unconsciously touching the scar on his face. "What I didn't know was that James Slater had made an arrangement with a Comanche war chief. We rode into a trap." Catherine remained silent, sensing that interruption would cause him to withdraw completely. "They took us at dawn," Hawk continued flatly. "Arrows first, then riders. No chance to organize a defense. I took this," he indicated his scar, "from a Comanche lance. Played dead while they finished the others." The stark revelation chilled Catherine to the bone. What Hawk wasn't saying, the details of how his companions had died, hung in the silence between them. "The Comanche took me for dead. The Slaters never checked. I lay there a full day before I could move, then walked 3 days to the nearest settlement." His ice-blue eyes finally met hers. I've hunted them since, between official duties. They know I'm looking. Now they're here, and it's no coincidence." "You think they've come for you?" Catherine asked. "I think they've come for you," Hawke corrected. "But they'll find me instead, and this time I'll be ready." The implications of his story settled heavily between them. This forced partnership was more than a convenient legal fiction. It was a defensive alliance against killers who had already demonstrated their brutality. "We should gather your things," Hawke said, abruptly practical again. "You'll move to the main house. It's more defensible, and my being here regularly won't raise questions if we're supposedly newlyweds." "And the town?" Catherine asked. "They'll need to believe this fiction as well." "We'll ride in this afternoon. Reverend Taylor can perform a quick ceremony with Donovan and Mrs. Henderson as witnesses, enough to make it official and public." Hawke's expression remained unreadable. "After that, we wait for the Slaters to make their move." As Catherine gathered her few possessions, she reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. She had fled Boston to escape Frederick Lawrence's threats, only to find herself in perhaps greater danger, and now legally bound to a scarred, enigmatic lawman whose own ghosts drove him to pursue murderers across the frontier. What she couldn't know was that Marshal Nathan Hawke had recognized her name the moment they met. Catherine Blackwell, daughter of Thomas Blackwell, the Boston shipping magnate whose murder had been reported in newspapers across the country. The same Catherine Blackwell whose testimony could send Frederick Lawrence to the gallows if she lived long enough to give it. And as they rode together toward town to formalize their arrangement, Hawke silently vowed she would survive, no matter the cost to himself. What began as duty was becoming something more, a commitment he hadn't sought but wouldn't abandon. The forced partnership was about to become all too real. The ceremony at Redemption Valley's small, white-clappered church took less than 15 minutes. Reverend Taylor, accustomed to frontier practicalities, asked a few questions when Marshal Hawke requested an immediate wedding. Sheriff Donovan and Sarah Henderson stood as witnesses, their expressions a mixture of surprise and knowing resignation. Catherine wore her best dress, the blue silk she'd traveled west in, while Hawke appeared in a clean black shirt and his least-worn trousers, his marshal's badge pinned to his vest. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his dark hair, transforming himself from frontier lawman to something approaching a proper groom. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Taylor declared, after they exchanged the simplest of vows. "You may kiss your bride, Marshal." A flash of uncertainty crossed Hawke's scarred face. Clearly, he hadn't anticipated this traditional conclusion to the ceremony. After a moment's hesitation, he leaned forward and pressed his lips briefly to Catherine's, a chaste gesture that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Congratulations," Sheriff Donovan said, as they signed the marriage certificate. His eyes held questions he didn't voice. "I'll make sure word gets around about the happy occasion." "See that it does," Hawke replied, his meaning clear. The more people who knew Catherine was under his protection, the safer she would be. By nightfall, they had returned to the Harmon Ranch, now ostensibly their marital home. Catherine moved her belongings into the main house while Hawke brought in supplies from his wagon, ammunition, extra weapons, and provisions that suggested he was preparing for a siege rather than a honeymoon. "I'll sleep in the line cabin," he said as darkness fell, "close enough to hear trouble, far enough for propriety." "Is that wise?" Catherine asked. "If someone is watching the property, they need to believe we're husband and wife, not that we're sharing a bedroom." Hawke checked the loading of his revolver before returning it to his holster. "I'll make a show of coming and going at appropriate times." Catherine nodded, relieved yet oddly disappointed by his practicality. Their arrangement was one of protection and convenience, nothing more. Yet the brief, impersonal kiss in the church had stirred something unexpected within her. "I've left a shotgun by your bed," Hawke continued. "You know how to use it?" "My father taught me the basics," she admitted, "though I've never fired at anything but targets." Hope you won't need to. Hawk moved to the window, peering out at the gathering darkness. Keep the lamps lit tonight. Make shadows on the curtains. Anyone watching will see movement inside. Assume we're settling in as newlyweds. The suggestion brought heat to Catherine's cheeks, but she understood the strategy. And tomorrow we maintain the illusion. You work in the garden. I repair the corral. Tasks a new couple might undertake. His blue eyes met hers. Meanwhile, Donovan and the Pinkertons will be scouring the territory for the Slater gang. With luck, they'll catch them before they discover you're here. After Hawk departed for the line cabin, Catherine found herself alone in the main house. Despite its modest size, it felt cavernous after a week in the smaller cabin. She wandered from room to room, noting details she'd missed during her first exploration. A small collection of books on a shelf in the bedroom, handmade curtains with careful embroidery at the edges, a rocking chair positioned to catch the morning. Light Jeremiah Harmon had created a home here, likely with his wife before her death. Now it was Catherine's, at least temporarily. The thought that she was sleeping in a dead man's bed gave her pause, but frontier practicalities quickly overcame such sentiments. The bed was sturdy and clean, the bedroom secure, and after the physical and emotional exhaustion of the day, sleep claimed her quickly. Dawn brought a sharp rap at the door. Catherine, already dressed and preparing breakfast, opened it to find Hawk on the porch, looking as if he'd been up for hours. "Morning," he said, removing his hat as he stepped inside. The gesture seemed oddly formal given their supposed marital status. Rode the perimeter at first light. No sign of visitors. "Coffee," Catherine offered, gesturing toward the pot bubbling. "On the stove." Hawk accepted with a nod, his eyes taking in the tidy kitchen. "You've been busy?" "Couldn't sleep past sunrise," she admitted. "Too many thoughts." She poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "Have you considered what happens if the Slaters aren't captured quickly? How long do we maintain this arrangement?" Hawk's scarred face revealed nothing as he sipped his coffee. "As long as necessary. Your safety is my primary concern. And your hunt for the Slaters. I'm not naive, Marshal. This marriage of convenience serves your purposes as well as my protection." A flicker of respect showed in his eyes. "True enough. The Slaters have evaded justice for too long. If using our situation as bait brings them into the open, I won't hesitate." "Using me as bait, you mean?" Catherine clarified, meeting his gaze steadily. Hawk set down his cup. "I won't let harm come to you, Mrs. Hawk. That's a promise." The name, her new legal identity, sounded strange to Catherine's ears. Mrs. Hawk. No longer Catherine Blackwell, Boston heiress and fugitive. Now she was a frontier marshal's wife, at least on paper. "I appreciate your protection," she said carefully, "but I need to understand my role in this strategy. Am I merely hiding behind your name, or do you expect me to actively participate in trapping these men?" "Both," Hawk admitted. "Your presence here under my protection will eventually draw them out. When it does, I need you prepared to defend yourself if necessary." Catherine nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you should teach me to shoot something more effective than this derringer." A ghost of a smile touched Hawk's lips. After breakfast, the days that followed established a routine that balanced vigilance with the ordinary tasks of ranch life. Each morning, Hawk would arrive at the main house after patrolling the property. They would share breakfast, then divide the day's work. Catherine tending the garden and household, Hawk repairing fences and outbuildings, always with a watchful eye on the surrounding countryside. In the afternoons, he taught her to handle firearms properly. First his Winchester rifle, then a Colt revolver that fit her hand better than the shotgun. Catherine proved a quick study, her determination overcoming her initial flinching at the weapon's recoil. "You're a natural," Hawk observed on the 3rd day, as she consistently hit targets at 30 yards. "Most city folk take weeks to develop that kind of aim." "My father believed women should know how to protect themselves," Catherine explained, reloading the Colt with growing confidence. He was unconventional in many ways. Thomas Blackwell, Hawke said quietly. When Catherine's head snapped up in surprise, he continued, Boston shipping magnate, found murdered in his office last winter. It was in newspapers across the country. Catherine's hands stilled on the revolver. You knew who I was from the beginning. Suspected, Hawke corrected. Confirmed it when the Pinkertons mentioned a woman fleeing Boston with substantial assets. Your father's murder was never solved, was it? Not officially, Catherine said, her voice tight. But I know who killed him. Frederick Lawrence, Hawke supplied. Your father's business partner, the man who's likely paying the Slater gang to find you. Catherine stared at him, shock giving way to understanding. You've been investigating. Me protecting you, Hawke countered. I needed to know what we're facing. He paused, studying her face. Your father discovered Lawrence was embezzling from the company, didn't he? Was planning to expose him? Yes, Catherine whispered. He told me he had proof, documentation of funds Lawrence had diverted to private accounts. He was going to present it to the board of directors the next morning. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the revolver. He never got the chance. And you witnessed something, Hawke guessed, something that could implicate Lawrence. Catherine nodded slowly. I arrived at the office unexpectedly that evening. Father had asked me to bring additional ledgers from our home safe. I heard voices, arguing. I looked through the doorway and saw... Her voice faltered. I saw Frederick strike my father with a brass paperweight. There was so much blood. Hawke's expression softened with unexpected compassion. You ran. I hid, she corrected. Behind a filing cabinet. Frederick searched the office, took some papers from my father's desk, then left. I went to my father, but he was already gone. Catherine drew a shaky breath. I knew Frederick would claim it was a robbery gone wrong, and if he discovered I had witnessed the murder, you'd be next, Hawke finished. So you fled west using the mail order arrangement as cover. It seemed the perfect solution, Catherine said bitterly. A new identity, a new life far from Boston. How could I know Samuel Reed didn't exist? Providence, Hawke suggested quietly. If you'd met your intended husband, you'd have been easy for Lawrence to track. Instead, you found your way here, where a U.S. Marshal could offer protection. The realization hung between them. Their seemingly random meeting had perhaps been the best possible outcome for her safety. Fate or divine intervention had brought her to Nathan Hawke's doorstep. Does this change our arrangement? Catherine asked, suddenly afraid he might reconsider sheltering a woman who brought such dangerous complications. Hawke's scarred face revealed nothing as he holstered his own revolver. Only strengthens it. Lawrence won't stop looking, neither will the Slaters. He met her gaze directly. But neither will I stop protecting what's mine. The possessive statement might have referred merely to his legal obligation as her husband, but something in his tone suggested a deeper, more personal commitment. Catherine found herself oddly comforted by it. As May bloomed into June, life at the Harmon Ranch, now known locally as the Hawkey Place, settled into an unexpectedly domestic rhythm. Catherine's garden flourished under her care, providing fresh vegetables for their table. The house, neglected since Jeremiah Harmon's death, gradually transformed with small feminine touches. Curtains she'd sewn from fabric purchased at Henderson's store, wildflowers in jars on the table, the organization of the pantry and kitchen to her preference. Hawke continued to sleep in the lined cabin, but spent his days at the main house, taking meals with Catherine and working steadily to improve the property. His initial awkwardness around her domestic arrangements gradually eased as they established comfortable routines. Most evenings, after the day's work was complete, they would sit on the porch watching the sunset. Sometimes they talked, careful, Conversations that revealed small pieces of their pasts without touching on the raw wounds each carried. Other times, they sat in companionable silence, the tension of their first days together mellowing into something approaching friendship. Catherine learned that Hawk had grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith. He'd fought briefly in the closing days of the Civil War, though he rarely spoke of it. Afterward, he drifted west, working as a shotgun rider for stagecoach lines before joining the U.S. Marshals 7 years ago. In turn, she shared stories of her Boston childhood, her mother's early death, her father's devotion to raising her with both practical skills and cultural refinements, her love of literature and music. She spoke of the shipping business only in general terms, avoiding mention of the vast fortune that was legally hers but remained beyond reach while Frederick Lawrence controlled the company offices. 3 weeks into their unusual arrangement, Sarah Henderson arrived from town with supplies and news. Catherine welcomed her into the kitchen while Hawk continued working on the new chicken coop he was building behind the house. "You've worked wonders with the place," Sarah commented, looking around the tidy kitchen with approval. "Jeremiah would be pleased to see it coming back to life. It's becoming home," Catherine admitted, pouring coffee for her guest. "More than I expected when we married so suddenly." Sarah's sharp eyes studied her face. "Happy accident, that wedding. Town's still buzzing about the Marshals' whirlwind romance. Some folks had bets he'd never marry after what happened with the Comanche." Catherine's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "What do you mean?" Sarah glanced toward the door, lowering her voice. "You don't know. Before the raid, Nate was engaged to a girl from Denver, Elizabeth something or other. She was waiting for him to return from that posse." She shook her head sadly. "When he came back with that scar and all that darkness in him, she couldn't handle it. Broke things off, married a bank manager instead." The revelation stunned Catherine. Hawk had never mentioned a fiancé, though it explained much about his reserved nature and reluctance to form attachments. "Don't tell him I told you," Sarah added hastily. "Man's proud, doesn't like folks knowing his personal business." "Of course," Catherine agreed, though the new information shifted her understanding of her taciturn husband. Behind his gruff exterior and professional dedication lay a man who had experienced betrayal as profound as her own. "Now, about the news," Sarah continued, accepting her coffee. "Pinkertons caught one of the Slater gang yesterday. Young fellow named Charlie Becker. He was trying to sell stolen jewelry in Cheyenne." Catherine tensed. "And the others?" "Still at large. Sheriff thinks they're hiding somewhere in the hills north of here, laying low after the stagecoach robbery." Sarah sipped her coffee. "But that's not the interesting part. Seems this Becker fellow was carrying a poster with your likeness on it. Catherine Blackwell, wanted for questioning in Boston." Cold dread settled in Catherine's stomach. "A wanted poster. Not official," Sarah clarified. "Private issue, offering $1,000 for information leading to your whereabouts." She eyed Catherine speculatively. "Marshall know you're a woman of interest back east?" "He does," Catherine confirmed quietly. "It's complicated, a case of mistaken identity and malicious accusations." Sarah nodded, not entirely convinced but unwilling to press further. "Well, your secret's safe with me. Poster doesn't look much like you anyway, especially now that you're Catherine Hawk." After Sarah departed, Catherine stood motionless in the kitchen, mind racing. A private wanted poster with her likeness. Frederick Lawrence was escalating his efforts to find her. If the Slater gang had such posters, how long before her face became known throughout the territory? The sound of Hawk's boots on the porch roused her from these dark thoughts. He entered, removing his hat as always, his expression questioning when he saw her troubled face. "Sarah Henderson brought news," Catherine explained, then recounted what she'd learned about Charlie Becker and the poster bearing her likeness. Hawk's jaw tightened as he listened. "We need to be prepared for increased attention," he said when she finished. "If Lawrence is circulating your description, it won't be long before someone makes the connection." "What do we do?" Catherine asked. "Change the narrative," Hawke replied. After a moment's consideration, "You're no longer Catherine Blackwell, recent arrival. You're Catherine Hawke, my wife of several months, who's been living at my ranch west of here until the Harmon place became available." "Rewrite my history." "Entirely," Catherine understood. "But what about people who saw me arrive on the stagecoach?" "Frontier memories are conveniently short," Hawke said, "and a few strategic conversations with key townspeople will help reshape recollections." Catherine nodded slowly, then hesitated. "Sarah also mentioned something else." Hawke's expression stilled. "What?" "Your former fiancée," Catherine said gently. "Elizabeth." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Hawke's face hardened, the scar on his cheek standing out white against suddenly flushed skin. "Sarah Henderson talks too much," he said coldly. "I'm sorry," Catherine offered. "I didn't mean to pry into painful memories." Hawke turned away, his shoulders rigid with tension. For a moment, Catherine thought he would walk out without another word. Instead, he spoke with his back to her, voice tight with controlled emotion. "Elizabeth Foster, daughter of a Denver merchant. We were to be married when I returned from tracking the Slaters." His hand rose unconsciously to touch his scarred face. "When I came back like this, half dead, consumed with nightmares, she decided she'd made a mistake. Said she needed a husband, not a project." The raw pain in his voice cut through Catherine like a knife. "I'm truly sorry, Nathan." It was the first time she had used his given name rather than his title. The intimacy of it hung in the air between them, causing him to turn back toward her with an unreadable expression. "It was a long time ago," he said finally. "Some wounds don't heal with time," Catherine countered softly. "They just become part of who we are." Something shifted in Hawke's ice-blue eyes, a recognition perhaps that she understood personal wounds all too well. The betrayal by Elizabeth, coming on the heels of the physical and psychological trauma of the Comanche raid, had clearly shaped the solitary, guarded man before her. "We should prepare for company," he said, changing the subject abruptly. "If the Slaters know you're in the territory, they'll come looking. Might be tonight, might be next week, but they'll come." The moment of connection passed, but something had changed between them. A door had been opened, however slightly, into the pain each carried. And as they moved through the house, checking windows and planning defensive positions, Catherine realized their forced partnership had evolved into something unexpected, a genuine alliance based on shared wounds and growing trust. What she couldn't know was that Nathan Hawke was fighting an internal battle as fierce as any he'd faced against outlaws. The marshal had sworn to protect Catherine as a professional duty, had married her as a tactical necessity. He hadn't planned on caring for her as a man might care for a woman, hadn't expected to find himself watching her in unguarded moments, admiring her courage and resilience, feeling something awaken inside him that he'd thought died along with his former life. And as the sun set on another day of their peculiar marriage, Hawke made a decision that would irrevocably change their relationship. Tonight, for the first time, he would not return to the line cabin. Instead, he would sleep on a bedroll in the main house's front room, close enough to protect Catherine if danger came, yet still honoring the boundaries of their arrangement. It was a small adjustment to their routine, but its significance ran deep. The marshal was no longer merely protecting a witness or sheltering a woman in danger. He was guarding his home and the woman who, against all odds, was becoming essential to him in ways that went far beyond duty or obligation. The gradual connection between them was strengthening day by day into something neither had anticipated when speaking those hasty vows in Redemption Valley's small church. Something that would soon be tested by fire and blood when their enemies finally found them, The attack came at dawn, 3 weeks after Charlie Becker's capture in Cheyenne. Catherine awoke to the sound of breaking glass, followed by Hawk's voice cutting through the grey morning light. "Down! Stay down!" She rolled from her bed to the floor as gunfire erupted from outside the house. A bullet splintered the window. Frame above her head, showering her with fragments of wood, Hawk appeared in the doorway, Winchester in hand. 4 men, 2 at the barn, 2 approaching the front porch. His voice was calm, almost detached, a soldier's assessment of battlefield conditions. "Can you get to the kitchen?" Catherine nodded, already reaching for the Colt revolver he'd given. She was dressed only in her nightgown, but modesty seemed irrelevant with bullets flying through the windows. "On my signal, move fast and stay low," Hawk instructed. "I've barricaded the kitchen door. Get behind the cast-iron stove. It'll stop most bullets." Another volley of gunfire hit the house, the sound of multiple weapons firing in sequence. Hawk returned fire through the broken window, his movements precise and economical. "Now," he said during a momentary lull. Catherine scrambled to her feet and ran, crouching low, across the hall to the kitchen. A bullet whizzed past her ear as she dove behind the heavy stove. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but her hands remained steady on the revolver. "I count 4, she called to Hawk, who had taken position at the front window. "But there could be more." "James Slater likes to hold back, watch from a distance," Hawk confirmed. "He's probably in the trees east of the house." A voice called from outside, rough with malice. "Marshal Hawk, send out the Boston woman and we'll let you live." "Frank Slater," Hawk muttered, "second in command and twice as stupid as his brother." He raised his voice to be heard outside. "She's my wife, Slater. You want her, you go through me." Harsh laughter answered him. "Your wife? That's a fine tale. We know who she is. Catherine Blackwell, witness to murder, worth $5,000 alive to our employer." The amount shocked Catherine. Frederick Lawrence had raised the bounty significantly from the $1,000 Sarah Henderson had mentioned. His desperation to silence her must be growing. "5 minutes, Marshal," Frank Slater called. "Send her out, or we burn you both inside." Hawk moved to Catherine's side, his face grim in the dim kitchen light. "Back door," he whispered. "When?" "I start firing from the front window. Run for the line cabin. There's a trap door under the bed, root cellar beneath. Hide there." "I won't leave you to face them alone," Catherine protested. "Not a request, Catherine," Hawk said firmly. "I can hold them off longer if I'm not worried about you catching a stray bullet." Before she could argue further, he pressed something into her hand, a folded paper. "If I don't make it, this gives you legal title to my ranch west of here. It's not much, but it's something to start over with." The gesture stunned her. "Nathan, no time," he cut her off. "Be ready to run on my signal." He moved back to the front window, positioning himself carefully to remain hidden from outside view. Catherine crouched by the back door, the revolver in one hand, Hawk's deed in the other, her mind racing with unspoken words and regrets. "Now!" Hawk shouted, unleashing a barrage of rifle fire through the front windows. Catherine threw open the back door and ran, barefoot in her nightgown, across the open ground toward the line cabin. Gunfire erupted behind her, Hawk keeping the attackers occupied, but a shout told her she'd been spotted. "The woman! She's running!" A bullet kicked up dirt near her feet. Catherine zigzagged, making herself a harder target as Hawk had taught. 20 yards to the cabin. 15, 10. A searing pain tore across her upper arm, a bullet grazing her flesh, but adrenaline carried her forward. She crashed through the cabin door, slammed it behind her, and dropped to her knees beside the narrow bed. With desperate strength, she dragged the bed frame aside, revealing the trapdoor Hawk had mentioned. As she pulled it open, a thunderous explosion rocked the main house. Kerosene, she realized with horror. They'd set fire to the porch. Catherine hesitated, torn between hiding as instructed and returning to help Hawk. The decision was made for her when the cabin door burst open. Behind her, She whirled, raising her revolver, but froze at the sight of the man in the doorway, expensively dressed despite trail dust, with a neatly trimmed beard and cold eyes she'd known since childhood. Frederick Lawrence stood before her, a derringer pointed at her heart. "Catherine," he said, his cultured Boston accent incongruous, "in the frontier cabin. How disappointing to find you living in such squalor." "Frederick," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "You've come a long way to commit another murder," he smiled thinly. "No murder necessary if you cooperate. I simply need your signature on a few documents, then you're free to continue this rustic adventure." His gaze swept dismissively over the cabin, "though I can arrange more comfortable accommodations if you prefer." From the main house came the sound of continued gunfire, punctuated by breaking glass and Hawk's shouts. The fire was spreading, judging by the orange glow now visible through the cabin window. "Your new friends are keeping the marshal occupied," Lawrence said, gesturing with his derringer for Catherine to stand. "The Slater gang has a particular grudge against him, I understand. Quite fortunate for our purposes." "You paid outlaws to find me," Catherine said, mind racing for a way to stall him. "Outlaws who murdered an innocent stagecoach driver," Lawrence shrugged. "Regrettable collateral damage. Business sometimes requires difficult decisions, as your father learned. And like my father, I will never sign over what's rightfully mine," Catherine declared, her finger tightening on the trigger of her hidden revolver. "Your father made the same misguided stand," Lawrence's voice hardened, "before I crushed his skull with that lovely bronze paperweight he was so proud of. The one from the London shipping exhibition. The casual mention of her father's murder. Weapon, a detail never published in the newspapers, ignited Catherine's fury. "You admit it then. You murdered him." "Of course I did," Lawrence said with chilling indifference. "Thomas was going to ruin everything, expose the investments I'd made with company funds, dissolve our partnership. He left me no choice." His smile returned, razor-thin and merciless. "Just as you leave me no choice now. Sign the transfer documents or join your father." Catherine raised her revolver from behind the bed frame, aiming directly at Lawrence's chest. "I choose neither option." Surprise flashed across his face, quickly replaced by calculation. "You won't shoot me, Catherine. You haven't the nerve." "My husband has been teaching me marksmanship," she replied coldly, "and my father taught me to protect what's mine." Lawrence's expression darkened. "Your husband is likely dead already. The Slaters are quite thorough when properly motivated." He raised his derringer. "Now be sensible." A gunshot tore through the cabin, not from Catherine's revolver or Lawrence's derringer, but from the doorway behind him. Frederick Lawrence staggered forward, a red stain blooming across his shoulder, his derringer clattering to the floor. Nathan Hawke stood in the doorway, his face blackened with soot, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. His Winchester was aimed steadily at Lawrence's head. "That was a warning," Hawke said, his voice deadly quiet. "The next one won't be." Lawrence clutched his wounded shoulder, his face contorted with pain and rage. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Marshal. I have connections across this territory, judges, bankers, politicians. You have nothing here," Hawke cut him off, "except a bullet in your shoulder and a murder confession a U.S. Marshal just witnessed." He glanced at Catherine. "You hurt?" "Grazed," she confirmed, indicating her bloodied arm. "Nothing serious." "The Slaters?" she asked. "Two dead, Frank wounded. James escaped." Hawke's expression was grim. "House is burning, couldn't save it." Catherine absorbed this information with surprising calm. The house had never truly been theirs, just borrowed space in a transitional time. "As long as you're alive, the rest can be rebuilt." Something flickered in Hawke's eyes at her words. Surprise, perhaps, at her resilience, or at the implication that their future remained linked. A groan from Lawrence drew their attention back to the immediate threat. The Boston businessman was pale from blood loss, but still conscious, his eyes darting between them with calculating hatred. "This changes nothing," he spat. "You have no proof beyond your word against mine. A frontier marshal and a woman claiming to witness a murder months ago in Boston. No Eastern court would—" "I have proof," Catherine interrupted. "The documents my father prepared before confronting you. The evidence of your embezzlement. I took them from his office after you left that night." Lawrence stared at her in shock. "Impossible! I searched his desk." "The hidden compartment in the filing cabinet," Catherine said, "where he kept copies of all sensitive correspondence. You were too busy wiping my father's blood from your hands to think of looking there." The confirmation that she possessed damning evidence seemed to deflate Lawrence completely. He sagged against the cabin wall, blood seeping between his fingers, as he clutched his wounded shoulder. "The papers are in a Boston bank vault," Catherine continued, "with instructions to be delivered to the police if anything happened to me. Your money and connections won't save you from the gallows, Frederick." Hawk moved into the cabin, keeping his rifle trained on Lawrence. "Catherine, check his pockets. He likely has the wanted posters with your likeness." With steady hands, Catherine searched Lawrence's expensive coat, finding what she sought in an inner pocket, several folded papers bearing her name and a sketch of her face, offering $5,000 for information on her whereabouts. "Evidence of conspiracy to commit kidnapping," Hawk noted with grim satisfaction, "alongside the murder confession I just witnessed. More than enough to hang you even without the Boston evidence." Outside, the main house was fully engulfed in flames, illuminating the dawn sky with orange light. The bodies of 2 Slater gang members lay in the yard where Hawk had shot them. Of Frank and James Slater there was no sign. They had fled during the chaos. "We need to get him to town before he bleeds out," Hawk said, gesturing to Lawrence with his rifle. "The Slaters could return with reinforcements." As if summoned by his words, hoofbeats approached from the direction of the road. Hawk positioned himself in the doorway, rifle ready, with Catherine behind him, her revolver aimed past his shoulder. "Marshal Hawk," Sheriff Donovan's familiar voice called. "You alive in there?" Relief washed through Catherine as the sheriff and several armed townsmen rode into view. Sarah Henderson had apparently spread word of potential trouble at the Hawk Ranch after the news about Charlie Becker's capture. "Impeccable timing, Sheriff," Hawk called back. "Got a wounded prisoner and evidence of multiple crimes." Within the hour, Frederick Lawrence was bound, his wound bandaged, and secured in Sheriff Donovan's custody for transport to the Redemption Valley Jail. The remaining Slater gang would be hunted by a larger posse organized from neighboring counties, with Pinkerton detectives Davis and Morgan leading the pursuit. As the impromptu rescue party prepared to depart, Catherine stood with Hawk watching. The last timbers of the main house collapse into glowing embers. Everything she had accumulated during her weeks at the Harmon Ranch, clothes, household items, the garden she had so carefully tended, was gone. "I'm sorry about the house," Hawk said quietly. Catherine shook her head. "It's just a structure. What matters survived." She looked up at him, taking in the soot-blackened face, the blood-crusted cut above his eye, the exhaustion evident in the set of his shoulders. "You saved my life." "You saved your own," he countered. "If you hadn't stalled Lawrence, kept him. Talking until I could get there. We saved each other," Catherine concluded. She hesitated, then added, "You gave me the deed to your ranch. Why would you do that?" Hawk's scarred face revealed little, but his eyes held an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Seemed right. If something happened to me, you'd need a place to start over." "And now," she asked, the question encompassing far more than property rights, "what happens now that Lawrence is captured and my identity revealed?" Before Hawk could answer, Sheriff Donovan approached, hat in hand. Marshal Mrs. Hawke, the prisoner's secure. Doc Wilson's waiting in town to tend to both your injuries." He glanced at the burning ruins. "Shame about the house. Jeremiah built it himself, log by log. It can be rebuilt," Hawke said, his eyes still on Catherine. "What about the Harmon nephew?" Catherine asked suddenly. "The one supposedly coming to claim the property?" Donovan looked uncomfortable. "About that, there is no nephew. Never was." "What?" Catherine and Hawke spoke in unison. Jeremiah's will left everything to the town to establish a school fund. Donovan explained. "County's been managing the property until it could be properly auctioned." He cleared his throat awkwardly. Seemed simpler to let folks think a relative was coming rather than invite speculation about the land's future. "So the property is to be sold," Catherine clarified, mind racing with this new information. "Technically, yes. Once the county probate. Process completes next month." Donovan studied them curiously. "Though given recent events, the town council might be persuaded to consider a private sale to the right buyer, especially if that buyer were a respected U.S. Marshal and his wife." The implications hung in the air between them. The land they stood on could be theirs legitimately if they chose to remain together beyond the emergency that had forced their marriage. "Something to consider," Hawke said carefully, neither accepting nor rejecting the possibility. After Donovan rejoined the others, Catherine and Hawke stood in silence, watching the last flames die in the early morning light. Between them lay unspoken questions about their future, a future neither had anticipated when they'd spoken hasty vows in Redemption Valley's church. "We should get you to town," Hawke said finally, gesturing to her injured arm. "That needs proper tending." "And you as well," Catherine replied, noting the dried blood on his temple. "Where will we stay now that the house is gone?" The simple question carried profound weight. There was no longer an immediate threat necessitating their marriage of convenience. With Lawrence captured and her identity known, Catherine could return to Boston to reclaim her inheritance and see justice done for her father's murder. Or she could remain in Wyoming territory and build a new life, with or without the man who now legally called her wife. Hawke seemed to recognize the crossroads they faced. For a long moment, he was silent, his scarred face giving away nothing of his thoughts. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew the gold band he'd placed on her finger during their hasty ceremony. The ring she'd removed while gardening and left on the bedroom windowsill, now miraculously rescued from the burning house. "That depends," he said, holding out the ring, "on whether Mrs. Hawke wishes to continue in that role now that the danger has passed." Catherine looked at the simple gold band gleaming in his palm, a symbol of an arrangement that had begun as strategy but had become something neither had anticipated. Behind them, the ruins of the main house smoldered. Before them stretched possibilities neither had considered when fate first brought them together. "The danger hasn't entirely passed," she said carefully. "James Slater is still free, and there will be legal proceedings against Lawrence that require my testimony." "True," Hawke acknowledged, "but those are reasons of practicality. I'm asking about something else entirely." The directness of his gaze demanded equal honesty from her. Catherine took a deep breath, gathering courage for the most important decision since she'd fled Boston months ago. "When I arrived in Redemption Valley, I was seeking security through marriage to a stranger," she began. "Fate brought me instead to a burned homestead and a marriage of necessity to a different stranger entirely." A small smile touched her lips. "It seems I have a pattern of finding unexpected futures in the ashes of my plans." Hawke waited, neither pushing nor retreating, allowing her the space to find her own truth. "I don't know if I'm ready to be Catherine Hawke in truth rather than name," she continued, "but I do know that I'm not ready to walk away from the possibility." She met his gaze steadily. If you're offering more time to discover what lies beyond necessity, then yes, I wish to continue. Something like hope flickered in Hawke's ice blue eyes as he held out the ring once more. This time, when Catherine extended her hand, it wasn't for show or strategy, but for the promise of a future they would shape together, step by step. As he slid the ring onto her finger, the rising sun broke through the morning clouds, casting golden light across the land that might soon be truly theirs. The homestead was in ashes, but from those ashes something new was already beginning to emerge, something neither had sought, but both now recognized as worth fighting for. What had begun as a mail-order bride's desperate flight from danger had transformed into a scarred marshal's chance at redemption. And though neither spoke the word aloud, the love growing between them was as tangible as the gold band that now symbolized not obligation, but choice. The crisis had forced revelations that might otherwise have remained buried. Now, with the truth between them, Catherine and Nathan Hawke faced the future together, a future they would build from the ground up, on foundations stronger than the house that fate had first brought them to. But even as they rode together toward redemption, shadows gathered on the horizon. James Slater remained at large, his thirst for vengeance against Hawke unquenched, and in Boston, Frederick Lawrence's powerful associates would not easily accept his downfall. The battle for their future had only just begun. Redemption Valley buzzed with excitement in the days following the dramatic confrontation at the Harmon Ranch. Frederick Lawrence, prominent Boston businessman and now confessed murderer, occupied the town's sole jail cell while awaiting transfer to Denver for formal arraignment. The Slater gang's attack on a U.S. Marshal's home had drawn the attention of territorial officials, with additional lawmen arriving to join the manhunt for the remaining outlaws. Catherine and Nathan Hawke became reluctant celebrities in the small frontier community. They had taken rooms at the Frontier Inn while deciding their next steps, both physical and relational. Dr. Wilson had tended their wounds, Catherine's bullet graze and Hawke's various cuts and burns, pronouncing them lucky to have escaped with relatively minor injuries. "You've got a choice to make," Hawke said one evening as they sat in the small parlor of the inn, away from curious ears. "Boston or Wyoming?" Catherine studied his scarred face in the lamplight. The events of the past weeks had changed something fundamental between them. The man who had once seemed forbidding and unapproachable now felt essential to her future, a partner in the truest sense. "It's not so simple," she replied. "There are responsibilities in Boston I can't ignore. My father's business employs dozens of people. His justice requires my testimony." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But my future doesn't have to be dictated by my past." Hawke nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been considering my position as well. The Marshal's office would transfer me to Denver or Cheyenne if I requested it. Larger towns, closer to railway lines east." The implication was clear. He was willing to compromise, to find middle ground between his life in the Wyoming territory and her connections to Boston. The gesture touched Catherine deeply. "That wouldn't be fair to you," she said. "Your life, your work is here. My work is upholding the law," Hawke corrected quietly. "That can be done anywhere." His ice-blue eyes held hers steadily. "The question is where we want to build our life together. If that's still what you want." Catherine's heart quickened at the directness of his question. "I meant what I said at the burned ranch. I'm not ready to walk away from the possibility of us." She took a deep breath. "But I need to return to Boston first, to testify against Lawrence, to put my father's affairs in order. After that, I'd like to come back here, to Wyoming." Something like relief flickered in Hawke's eyes. "You'd choose this territory over Boston society?" "I'd choose a future we create together over a past defined by loss," Catherine corrected. "Whether that's here or elsewhere, Before Hawke could respond, a knock at the parlor door interrupted them. Sheriff Donovan entered, hat in hand, his expression troubled. "Pardon the intrusion," he said, "but there's news you both should hear. Judge Thompson arrived from Cheyenne this afternoon. He's reviewed the charges against Lawrence and—" Donovan hesitated. "And what?" Hawke prompted, tension evident in his voice. "And he's inclined to dismiss the territorial charges, the conspiracy, the connection to the Slater gang, in favor of extraditing Lawrence to Massachusetts for the murder trial." Catherine frowned. "That seems reasonable. Murder is the more serious charge." "It would be," Donovan agreed, "except Lawrence has powerful friends." The judge received telegrams from 3 Massachusetts congressmen and a federal circuit judge, all vouching for Lawrence's character and questioning the reliability of a lone female witness. Cold realization washed over Catherine. "They're trying to discredit me before I even testify." "Worse," Hawke said grimly. "If Lawrence is released to friendly authorities for transport east, he might never stand trial at all. Convenient escapes can be arranged." Donovan nodded soberly. "Judge wants to speak with both of you tomorrow morning. Formal hearing is set for the following day." After the sheriff departed, Catherine paced the small parlor, her mind racing. "This can't be happening. Frederick confessed to my father's murder. You heard him?" "My testimony will help," Hawke assured her. "But Lawrence will claim I misheard, or that he was speaking under duress. Without the physical evidence you mentioned, the documents in Boston, it becomes your word against his." Catherine stopped pacing, a new determination hardening within her. "Then we need those documents. I have to return to Boston immediately." "Not alone," Hawke said firmly. "Lawrence has associates who would stop at nothing to prevent those papers from reaching a courtroom." "You can't leave the territory while James Slater remains at large," Catherine pointed out. "Your duty is to my wife," Hawke interrupted, rising to stand before her. "Officially and personally. The Pinkertons can hunt Slater. This takes precedence." The declaration, his first unambiguous acknowledgement that their marriage had become more than a convenient arrangement, warmed Catherine despite the gravity of their situation. "Then we go together," she decided. "By telegraph to Cheyenne, then the eastbound train." Hawke nodded, already mentally planning the journey. "We'll need to move quickly. Once Lawrence's associates learn of our intentions, they'll try to intercept us." The following morning brought another unexpected development. Judge Thompson, a stern-faced man with iron-gray hair and calculating eyes, received them in the small room above the sheriff's office that served as Redemption Valley's courthouse. "Marshal Hawke, Mrs. Hawke," he greeted them with formal courtesy that didn't reach his eyes. "I've reviewed the statements regarding Mr. Lawrence's alleged confession." "There was nothing alleged about it, Your Honor," Hawke said firmly. "I witnessed Lawrence admit to the murder of Thomas Blackwell." The judge waved a dismissive hand. "Hearsay evidence at best, inadmissible without corroboration." He fixed Catherine with a penetrating stare. "Mrs. Hawke, or should I say Miss Blackwell, your situation is most irregular. Arriving in the territory under false pretenses, entering a hasty marriage with an officer of the law, making accusations against a respected businessman." "My father was murdered," Catherine said, her voice steady despite her rising anger. "Frederick Lawrence crushed his skull with a bronze paperweight, then stole company documents to cover his embezzlement. I witnessed it, and I have evidence in Boston that will prove his guilt." Thompson's expression remained skeptical. "So you claim, yet you fled east rather than reporting the crime, concealed your identity, and have produced no tangible evidence." "We intend to retrieve that evidence immediately," Hawke stated. "I request the court delay any decision regarding Lawrence's extradition until we return from Boston." "Impossible," Thompson replied curtly. The territorial court cannot indefinitely detain a citizen of Massachusetts based solely on unsubstantiated accusations. Mr. Lawrence will be transferred to state authorities tomorrow for return to Boston. He shuffled papers on his makeshift desk. If you wish to pursue charges there, you are, of course, free to do so. As they left the makeshift courtroom, Catherine struggled to contain her frustration. He's already decided. Lawrence's friends have reached him somehow. Hawke's scarred face was set in grim lines. Then we don't wait for the legal system to fail us. We leave for Cheyenne today, reach Boston ahead of Lawrence, and secure the evidence before he can destroy it. By noon, they had made hasty preparations for departure. Catherine packed the few possessions she'd acquired since the fire, while Hawke arranged for fast horses to take them to Cheyenne, where they could catch the eastbound train. As they prepared to depart, Sarah Henderson arrived at the inn with unexpected news. Pinkerton Telegraph came for the sheriff, she reported breathlessly. They've cornered James Slater in a mining camp near Laramie. Federal marshals are moving in to capture him. Relief washed over Catherine. With the last of the Slater gang about to be apprehended, one significant threat to their safety would be eliminated. Hawke received the news with cautious optimism. If they capture him alive, his testimony could further implicate Lawrence in the conspiracy. There's more, Sarah continued. Judge Thompson received another visitor this morning. Eastern gentleman, very well dressed. They spoke privately for nearly an hour. Her sharp eyes fixed on Catherine, heard the judge call him Senator. The implication was clear. Lawrence's connections extended higher than they had realized, perhaps to the federal level. Their task in Boston had just become infinitely more difficult. We need to leave now, Hawke said decisively. They departed Redemption Valley within the hour, riding hard for Cheyenne. The 2-day journey would be grueling, but necessary if they hoped to reach Boston before Lawrence could mobilize his associates to destroy the evidence Catherine had hidden. The first day passed without incident, with Hawke's vigilance and knowledge of the terrain keeping them on course and alert for potential ambush. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, taking turns standing watch through the night. During her watch, Catherine found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. She had left Boston a frightened witness, fleeing for her life. She would return as Catherine Hawke, still legally bearing that name, though the nature of their marriage remained in evolution, with a U.S. Marshal at her side and determination in her heart. The second day dawned clear and cool. They were making good time toward Cheyenne when disaster struck. Hawke's horse stepped in a prairie dog hole, stumbling badly and throwing its rider. Catherine watched in horror as Hawke hit the ground hard, his leg twisting beneath him at an unnatural angle. She dismounted immediately, rushing to his side. "Nathan!" His face was ashen with pain, but his eyes remained clear. "Broken?" He managed through gritted teeth, indicating his right leg where bone had torn through his trousers. "You'll have to go on without me." "Absolutely not," Catherine said, firmly, already assessing their situation. "We're only a few hours from Cheyenne. I'll make a splint, help you onto my horse." "Catherine," Hawke's voice was tight with both pain and urgency, "every hour counts. Lawrence's men will be watching the Boston bank where you stored those documents. If they reach it first, then they reach it first," she interrupted. "I'm not leaving you injured in the wilderness." She met his gaze steadily. "We face this together or not at all." Something shifted in Hawke's expression, a realization perhaps of the depth of her commitment to him. He nodded once, then helped her gather materials for a makeshift splint. The remainder of the journey to Cheyenne was agonizing. Hawke rode, double with Catherine, his splinted legs strapped securely, every jolt of the horse's movement sending fresh waves of pain through him. Yet he never complained, his stoicism earning Catherine's deepening admiration. They reached Cheyenne as dusk. fell, heading directly to Dr. Bennett's practice near the railway station. The physician confirmed what they already knew. Hawke's leg was badly broken, requiring proper setting and at least 6 weeks of healing before he could travel safely. "You have to go on without me," Hawke insisted when they were alone in the doctor's back room. "The eastbound train leaves tomorrow morning. If you wait for me to heal, the evidence will be long gone." Catherine sat beside his bed, her expression troubled. "I don't want to face Lawrence's associates alone." "You won't be," Hawke assured her. "I have contacts in Boston, former marshals, men I trust. Telegraph them from the station. They'll meet you, provide protection." He took her hand, his grip firm despite his pain. "You're stronger than you know, Catherine. You survived witnessing your father's murder, fled across the country, faced down outlaws and Lawrence himself." A rare smile softened his scarred face. "You even managed to civilize a battle-hardened marshal. Boston's high society poses little threat after all that." His confidence in her bolstered Catherine's resolve. "I'll go," she decided. "But I'll return as soon as the documents are secured. We present our case together." "Together," Hawke agreed, the simple word carrying the weight of a vow. The following morning, Catherine boarded the eastbound train, her heart heavy with the separation, but her determination unwavering. Hawke had provided letters of introduction to trusted contacts in Boston, former lawmen and legal officials who would help her navigate the challenges ahead. As the train pulled away from Cheyenne Station, Catherine touched the gold band on her finger, no longer merely a prop in a marriage of convenience, but a symbol of a partnership forged in adversity and strengthened by choice. The journey east gave her time to formulate a careful strategy. Lawrence would be transported under guard, likely by private railcar given his wealth and connections. By traveling ahead of him, Catherine hoped to retrieve the hidden documents from the Boston bank vault before his associates could intervene. The Boston that greeted Catherine after her long absence seemed simultaneously familiar and foreign. The cobblestone streets and brick townhouses, the gas lamps and clattering carriages, all remained as she remembered. Yet she viewed her childhood city through new eyes, shaped by her experiences in the Wyoming Territory. Her first stop was the First Bank of Boston, where she had rented a private vault box under an assumed name the day after her father's murder. The bank manager, recognizing her despite the months away, greeted her with surprise. "Miss Blackwell, we'd heard rumors of your departure. Your return is unexpected." "Mrs. Hawke now," Catherine corrected, presenting her identification and vault key. "I've come to retrieve items from my security box." The manager's eyebrows rose at her married status, but he asked no questions as he escorted her to the vault. Once alone with the metal box, Catherine removed the leather portfolio containing her father's evidence, ledgers documenting Lawrence's embezzlement, correspondence proving his intent, and her own written testimony of the murder she had witnessed. These papers, combined with Hawke's testimony regarding Lawrence's confession, would ensure justice for her father, regardless of Lawrence's political connections. But Catherine knew securing a conviction was only part of the battle she faced. There was still her father's business to reclaim and restructure. Her next stop was the offices of Hamilton and Wright, her father's longtime attorneys. They received her with professional courtesy that barely masked their shock at her transformation from grieving daughter to confident businesswoman. "Mrs. Hawke," Mr. Hamilton said, testing the unfamiliar name. "Your telegram mentioned urgent legal matters regarding your father's estate." "Yes," Catherine confirmed, placing the portfolio on his desk. "I have evidence of Frederick Lawrence's crimes, both against my father personally and against the company through embezzlement. I need your firm to initiate immediate legal proceedings." Hamilton's expression registered surprise, then calculation. "Lawrence has powerful friends, Mrs. Hawke. Pursuing these charges will not be without risk." "I'm well aware of the risks," Catherine replied. I've already faced armed outlaws and a burning homestead in Wyoming. Boston's political machinations hold little terror after that. Her quiet confidence clearly impressed the attorney. As they discussed strategy, Catherine outlined her plans for the business, appointing trusted managers to oversee operations while she returned to Wyoming, establishing a clear succession plan and implementing safeguards against future embezzlement. "You've changed," Hamilton observed as their meeting concluded. "Thomas would be proud of the woman you've become." The comment touched Catherine deeply. "I had help finding my strength," she said, thinking of Hawk and the crucible of their shared experiences. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine moved with decisive efficiency through Boston society. She reclaimed her father's townhouse, met with business associates and employees, and filed formal charges against Lawrence, who had arrived in Boston under guard but was quickly released to house arrest through his political connections. True to his word, Hawk's contacts provided protection and guidance, helping Catherine navigate the treacherous waters of legal challenges and social pressure. Lawrence's allies attempted to discredit her at every turn, spreading rumors about her frontier marriage and questioning her mental stability after her father's death. Yet Catherine remained undeterred, drawing on the resilience she had developed. In Wyoming, when Lawrence's attorneys offered a settlement, dropping all charges in exchange for Catherine selling her ownership in the company, she refused outright. "I didn't survive outlaws, fire and bullets to surrender to lawyers in Boston," she told Hamilton. "We proceed to trial." The final confrontation came not in a courtroom, but in Catherine's father's study, where Lawrence himself appeared one evening, having bribed his way past the guards assigned to his house arrest. "You're more troublesome than your father," he said, anger barely contained beneath his cultured exterior. He at least could be reasoned with. Catherine stood her ground, the derringer Hawk had given her hidden in the folds of her dress. "My father's mistake was confronting you alone. I won't repeat it. One last offer," Lawrence proposed. "Double the settlement amount, enough to build a palace in your precious Wyoming territory. In exchange, you drop the charges and never return to Boston." "My answer remains no," Catherine replied calmly. "Justice isn't for sale, Frederick." Something dangerous flashed in Lawrence's eyes. "Then perhaps history will repeat itself after all. Such a tragedy. The daughter murdered in the same room as her father. Before he could move, the study door burst open. 2 men entered, one wearing a U.S. Marshal's badge, the other supporting himself on a cane, his right leg still splinted. "Nathan!" Catherine exclaimed, joy and shock mingling at the sight of her husband. Hawk's ice-blue eyes never left Lawrence as he aimed his revolver at the businessman's chest. "Frederick Lawrence, you're under arrest for escaping custody, attempting to intimidate a federal witness, and conspiracy to commit murder." "You have no jurisdiction here," Lawrence sputtered, his composure cracking. "I do," corrected the other man, displaying a badge. "U.S. Marshal Daniel Porter, Boston jurisdiction. We've been monitoring your movements since you violated the terms of your house arrest." As Porter took Lawrence into custody, Hawk crossed to Catherine's side, his free arm encircling her waist in a protective gesture that felt entirely natural. "You're supposed to be recovering in Cheyenne," she admonished, though her eyes shone with happiness. "Couldn't let you face him alone," Hawk replied simply. "Some things are worth the pain of travel." With Lawrence in federal custody and the evidence secure, the path to justice for Thomas Blackwell was finally clear. Catherine and Hawk spent the next month in Boston, testifying at preliminary hearings and ensuring the business was left in capable hands. "What happens now?" Catherine asked as they stood on the platform at Boston's railway station, the westbound train preparing for departure. "We never properly decided where home would be." Hawk's scarred face softened as he looked down at her. "I telegraphed Sheriff Donovan last week. The town council approved our offer for the Harmon property." Surprise and delight bloomed on Catherine's face. You made an offer without consulting me? Consulted your heart, Hawk corrected, the hint of a smile touching his lips. Seemed clear that's where you wanted to be. Was I wrong? Catherine shook her head, her eyes bright with emotion. Not wrong at all. But what about your position as marshal? Resigned from the federal service, Hawk revealed, taking the sheriff's position in Redemption Valley instead. Donovan's moving to Cheyenne next month. His expression grew serious. It's less danger, more stability. Better for a man considering a real family. The implication brought warmth to Catherine's cheeks. Are you considering such things, Marshal Hawk? Have been since a certain mail-order bride stumbled into my life, he admitted. Though I'd understand if you preferred Boston's comforts to rebuilding a burned homestead. Catherine laughed, the sound bright with genuine joy. I chose the homestead, and the man who comes with it, long before we stepped foot in Boston. She reached up to trace the scar on his cheek with gentle fingers. Some would say we've done everything backward. Marriage, first courtship after love discovered along the way. Some would say we found our way exactly as we were meant to, Hawk countered, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm, a gesture of tenderness that would have been unimaginable from the stern lawman she'd first encountered at the Harmon Place. As they boarded the westbound train, Catherine took one last look at Boston, the city of her birth and childhood, now firmly her past. Ahead lay Wyoming Territory, a burned homestead to rebuild, and a life to create alongside the scarred ranger who had claimed her as his wife in name and, now, in heart. What had begun as a desperate journey to an empty homestead had transformed into something neither could have imagined, a partnership forged in crisis, tested by fire, and ultimately chosen with clear eyes and full hearts. The train whistle sounded, steel wheels beginning their westward journey. Catherine settled beside Hawk in their private compartment, her head resting naturally against his shoulder. No words were needed as they left the complications of Boston behind and turned toward the simpler truths of the life they would build together. In Redemption Valley, the charred remains of the Harmon house awaited them, not as a symbol of deception and loss, but as the foundation for something new and genuinely their own. Catherine Hawk was going home, not to the place she had originally sought, but to the one she had unexpectedly found, beside a man whose scars matched her own, whose strength complemented her courage, and whose love had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. The mail-order bride had found not the husband she'd expected, but the one she truly needed. And the scarred ranger had claimed not just a wife, but a future brighter than any he'd dared to imagine after the darkness he'd endured. Together, they rode westward, toward a horizon unmarked by the shadows of their past. A new beginning written, in their own hand, on their own terms, in the wide-open promise of the Wyoming sky. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.